Everybody to APCUG's Wednesday workshop, where we spend a few hours in the middle of the week and learn some more things about technology. My name is John Kennedy. I'm your host for the APCUG Wednesday workshops, and along with me is Judy Tallur, who takes care of questions, Bill James, who takes care of all the other issues, and he's the one that'll be letting you into the rooms. And also with me today is my backup guys, or Beach and Cal Esnault, and they may be sharing things a little bit later. Today we're kind of doing with an extra Wednesday. This is a 5th Wednesday in September, so we kind of are bridging two gaps. It's not strictly a Linux and it's not another one, so it's kind of both. Today we're going to be talking about VirtualBox. We've had a number of people who have asked about how to use VirtualBox, because we have mentioned in the Linux workshops that you can use VirtualBox or virtual machine to test out Linux to see how it works and what it does before you even have to try to install it on your computer. And so we've had people say, oh, I don't really understand how to do that. So we're going to look at a virtual machine today and see how you set it up and use it. And then on our second part of our workshop today, we've had people talking or asking questions about the comment about custom installations and partitioning your Linux, or it can work for Windows. It's not just for Linux. I did partition when I was a Windows user. So we'll talk about that and then actually use VirtualBox to create a Linux installation, which will be also a custom install. Way back in the beginning of our learning Linux, we did an install, but an automatic one. And so today we'll talk about the other one. So if you do have questions during the presentation, put them in the chat box for Judy, and after we're all done, she'll ask some of those. And as always, this is being recorded, and if you don't want to be visible on screen, just turn off your camera and you'll be fine. All right, let's go ahead and let's get started today. I'm also going to use the marvel of virtual desktops. So let's start sharing. If you don't like that panel that's blocking part of your view, you can go up to your menu at the top and say hide the video. I got to do that on my other screen. Okay, I got to get that. There we go. Get out of the way. Stop moving back. Virtual machines and custom Linux installations are what we're going to do. I'm going to go and have part of my presentation on the slides, and then I'm going to go live, because I always like to go live. Who knows what's going to happen when you go live? But the slide or the Impress, the PDF that you'll be sent out has a very detailed step-by-step of what I'm exactly doing, and you'll get the full one later. This is just going to be the text slides. So let's start out part one. We're going to talk about virtual machines. So the question a lot of people always ask, what's a virtual machine? The simplest answer is it's a computer that's just made out of software. It's not a real computer. It's a software program that makes you think you're running a program. It's all software. There's nothing physical about it, but it does use the physical parts of your regular computer. And then the part about that we like is that you can run any software that you'd want run on a real physical computer on that virtual machine computer. So this is where sometimes you can be able to run a program that might not run on your real computer in a virtual. Two words that you really need to understand, and we will use a lot, in that is guest and host. Now, the host is going to be your real physical machine, and then you're going to create a virtual guest machine. And the easiest way to think about this is when you think about your own home and you are a host and you invite somebody to come to your house. They come into your house and then they have access to what's in your house. They can use your restroom, they can use the dining room, they can use any room that you allow them to. If they're going to happen to be an overnight guest, then you will allow them to use a bedroom. So you control what the guest gets to do. And that's the same as in a virtual machine. The host will determine what things that the guest can do. Each virtual machine, and you can have more than one running at a time. It just all depends on the power of your host machine. So they are separate ones. And each of these virtual machines is running its own operating system, whether it's a Windows or a Linux. And so as they run, they have access to storage, networking, they have a whole bunch of settings that you can do. And then of course, software that they run. Now, why would you need one? My feeling is everybody needs a virtual machine that's running the same exact operating system as you're doing on your host machine. And the reason for that is you can always be a step ahead of yourself by testing out things on the virtual machine. I will admit today, reluctantly, that I am running this today on a Windows machine. And that's because most of the people in our Learning Linux workshops, people who are coming to Linux, aren't running Linux, or they wouldn't need to come to a Learning Linux workshop probably. So I'm doing it on this because most of you would be using Windows. There is nothing different about it. It looks the same and works the same on whether it's the Linux or the Windows, but I'm going to do it for you. So on this machine, I would, if I listened to myself, I would run a virtual Windows 10 machine. And then before I did anything on my real machine, I would do it on the virtual machine. I would do the updates. And as soon as I saw that it didn't crash something, then I could do the updates on my real machine, knowing that it's going to be fine. If I wanted to install a program, wasn't quite sure what it might do, install it on the virtual machine. And then if it runs fine, install it on my real machine. And what's great about having a virtual machine is you can try out things and do things and experiment. And if it goes bad, no big deal. You just build a new virtual machine as opposed to trying it on your own. We say this with people who are on Linux to when they want to use and learn about command line and the terminal. Go in there and do all sorts of stuff. And if it messes up, you didn't mess up your computer, you messed up the virtual one. So why else would I want one of these? So the first slide that says everybody needs to have one so that you can do things before you do it on your own. But you can use it to try out new and different operating systems. Many of you are looking into trying out Linux. So while you're running your Windows as a host, you can do guest machines and try out Linux. There are a number of people who are out there that might even say today that's what they're doing, and they're running Windows 11 in a virtual machine to see how it's going, so it's not affecting their host computer. And if they can run Windows 11, once they feel comfortable, they said, okay, I'm going to upgrade my host to 11. You can also use it to be able to run older programs. Judy has a program that she loves for video editing, and it's not really the kind that works very well on the modern operating systems. She could use a virtual machine and use an older, like Windows 7, and run those old programs on Windows 7. You could do things such as, if you wanted to be a Linux person and you had to have a Windows only program, you could run it in a virtual Windows and then use Linux for everything else. The other reason that I would probably have a Windows virtual machine on my Linux computer is so that when I get people who say I need help, then I can open up the virtual windows and see what the problem is and try to help them that way. And that way I don't have to have a Windows machine. So what can you use to make virtual machines? These are the top ones that are out there. There may be some more out there that other people can share later on, say, well, here's another one. But VirtualBox is a cross-platform, works on all of them. It's open source and totally free. And it wouldn't take too many workshops that you attend with me that you know that that one gets big top priority. Totally free, open source. VMware is cross-platformed also. It's free to begin with, but there are some features that are included in VirtualBox that might have a cost to it to get to that next level. Parallels is the software for creating virtual things in the Mac system, and Windows uses the Hyper-V. But unfortunately, just like with the program that Bill James showed us about tech support, you can't do Hyper-V unless you are in the Pro Enterprise level. All of the home users, which is the majority of you people, you can't use it, so you'll have to do another one. So here's what the plan is for today. We're going to be focusing on VirtualBox, and that's because that's the one I use, because it's open source and it's free. And I'm going to show you how to get it, download it, install it, how we set up a virtual machine. And then we're going to use a virtual machine to do a install of Linux, but do it in a custom install. So it's going to be kind of a mixed bag of different things. And then when we're done, we're going to go to a question and answer. Now, because I've got so many things on the slides, I have my cheat sheet here to make sure I don't skip anything, because we're going to go live now. We don't have to, but it's going to be more fun to go live. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get VirtualBox. So we go to the web, and VirtualBox is virtualbox.org. Make sure you go to virtualbox.org, because there's a chance if you go to virtualbox.com, you might not like what you get. VirtualBox has a nice big download box right there in the middle. Over on the side, if you want to check it out, you can find a little bit about it. You can see some screenshots showing what it's going to be, but that's what you're going to get today. There's documentation. I told the guys this morning that the document that you can download is almost 400 pages, because it's a very in-depth, and because it's cross-platform, there's a section for each part of the VirtualBox for each operating system. But we're going to go to the downloads just so you can see that in the downloads, you can see how right in the middle, it works with Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Solaris, and a Solaris 11. The main three ones are the ones that we mostly use. With Windows and OS X, there's only one choice. So you would click on Windows and download. And then if you wanted the Mac OS, you would just click on that and download. If you are doing Linux, which is what I run and a number of us run, because there are so many options, that's what we like about Linux. When you click on that, you'll see that you have to go and select the kind of like the family that you're running. You can see that up at the top, we've got the Red Hat versions and the Oracle Linux. Oracle is the company. They also have a version of Linux. If you're using Ubuntu or the Ubuntu family, strictly Debian, OpenSUSE, and Fedora. Those are kind of like the top ones. So for me, if I'm running my Mint, I would be a Ubuntu and version, off of the 2104 that's out there. And so you would just click and download that. Now, in addition to getting the host program that you need, there's also a second program that everybody needs, and it's one program that works for everybody because it works inside of VirtualBox, and that's their guest extensions. And what that does is makes VirtualBox even better than the plain brown bag. As you can see, it talks about getting support for USB 2s and 3s, and there are some other things that it provides. So you want to get that extension pack and install that. So what we'll do now is the download is no big deal. Just download to whatever your favorite download location, if it's other than downloads. And then you just run your installation program. No big deal. Once you get the VirtualBox installed, then you install the extension one. You got to do it in that order or it doesn't work right. So next we'll do is we'll come back to VirtualBox. And here we go. And in VirtualBox, the very first time you do it, there will be nothing on the left-hand side except for tools. I have been playing with it to set things up today, so I would have something. So as a magician would say, pay no attention to what's in my hat, or in Wizard of Oz, don't pay attention to the guy behind the curtain. Pretend that that's all blank. And all you would have on here is a blank screen that would tell you something about welcome to VirtualBox and whatever. The key thing we're going to do is we need to make a new VirtualBox. Okay, there's what you would, that's the opening screen. You would have that screen. There's my favorite Penguin who's going to build things for us. Yay, Penguin. So these three things wouldn't be there. So what we'll do is we're going to either new or add. We're going to do a new one. And so you click new. Now the first thing that pops up is we need to name this and pick what operating system you want this guest to be. I'm running Windows. I can run Linux inside of Windows. I could run Mac OS inside of Windows. I can be running Linux and run Windows. I can be in Windows and run Windows. And so you give it a name. The name is your choice. Now by default, and this would say, it sounds kind of strange, but by default, it automatically popped up to Windows and Windows 7. I'm not quite sure why it's still that way, except many Windows 10 people still want to run a Windows 7. But if that's not what you want to do, you just drop it down and you can see I can go as far back. If I had the disks for 3.1, I could install a virtual 3.1 and have fun going back in time. And as you can see, they've got some interesting names. You know, there's the Windows 2003, 7, 8, 10, and 2016. Some different names, or these are some major updates. All right, so you do that. If you're not doing a Windows, as we saw before, you can run Linux, Solaris, BSD is another kind of Linux, an old-fashioned IBM OS2, there's your Mac, and even an other. I'm not quite sure what all the others are. If you're going to run a Linux, you'll get more choices. And you just drop it down and find which one you want. And in here, we've talked more about the Arch, the Debian, the Fedora, the Gentoo, Mandravia, Oracle, Red Hats, OpenSUSE, Turbo Linux, Ubuntu, Xandros, and other. So if you don't find that, you might pick an other. The other thing you can always do is just start with the generic kernel number, and most of us would be doing something in this choice because we're all running pretty much 4 point something. So if you didn't have it. Now, when you give it a name, VirtualBox is kind of smart enough to kind of sense what you're going to do. So I'm going to change this, and I'm going to type Linux, and right away, it says, oh, this is, you're going to be creating a Linux operating system. And it just picks the Oracle to start. But I do, and it says, oh, okay, the Linux generic one. And watch when I say I'm going to do Mint. It says Mint is based on Ubuntu. So it fills it out for me. So if what you type is clever enough that Oracle can tell what you're doing, if not, you can just choose what you want. So I'm going to name it for me so I know that I'm doing the Mint Mate desktop version. Name has no bearing on it except for me. And I'm going to put a number 2 because I already have, no, I changed the name. I'll just do it that way. All right, so first thing you do is you have to give it a name and make sure that you set it up as to what type and version you're doing. Now, next, they're going to ask you, well, how much RAM do you want to allocate for your VirtualBox? Now, this is going to be dependent on how much RAM you have to begin with. As you can see on this computer, I've got about, I do have 16 gigs on here. And I can give it however much I want. But you got to remember, if you give all of your RAM to your VirtualBox, your host computer is not going to have anything. So you got to do kind of a give and take and share. So you can give it anywhere. They recommend that for a base Linux, you only need 1 gig. But I'm got enough that I'm going to give it a 3 gig, 3072. And I can either drag the button to how much RAM, and you can see, you get up past here and they're warning you, you're going to cause problems with your host machine, giving out too much. So this is also what you kind of have to look at when you're doing it on your computer. If you only have 4 gigs of RAM, then you only want to give 1 or 2. You don't want to go more than half of your memory to the thing, or your computer's not going to go very well. So you pick that. All right, so then we say next. And now, do you want to create a hard disk? Well, yeah. How else am I going to run my host or my guest machine, virtual machine, if I don't have a hard drive? Now, they also tell you that they recommend that a minimum 10 gigs for what you're doing. They know approximately, depending on what you do. If I was going to run a Windows one, it would tell me I needed more because Windows has to have more, but it says 10. So I'm going to say I'm going to create a hard drive and ignore down here because it knows some of the virtual disks that I've already made. You wouldn't have that. So he said, okay, create that. Now we have the question about what do you want? What kind of a hard drive type do you want? Well, VDI is the default virtual desktop image. And so, as with almost everything, if you just stick with your defaults, you're going to be good. But if you wanted to, the VHD is the format that Windows can use, probably with the Hyper-V. And the VMDK is what VMware would use for theirs. So you can create it in VirtualBox, but then have it run in one of the other operating systems. The one that's not showing here is one that's like an HDD, and that would be the version that Mac OS would use. I'm not quite sure why it doesn't show it here, but I guess it's not an option to run on the Mac. So we're just going to say, yep, I want a VirtualBox. That's the one I want. And the other reason is it makes it very easy that you can create a virtual machine on your computer and share the file with somebody else, and they've already got it ready up and run. Now, there's two ways that you can create this disk on your computer, and this is actually physical. You have to take up space for your virtual machine and your hard drive. You can have a dynamically allocated or a fixed size. Now, remember they told us, they said that 10 was kind of like the recommended. If I do a dynamically allocated, it will reserve 10, but it will only use what it needs as it goes. So maybe in the beginning, when you do a base install, maybe it uses 6 gigs. You add some programs. Now we need to expand a little more to make room for the programs. So it will gradually expand to a maximum of the 10 that you set. Now, it's a little bit faster to start up initially because it doesn't have to make a full 10. But as you go, it's going to be a little bit slow because it has to expand to make room for programs you install and files that you save. If you do a fixed disk, it'll make it all at once. Take a little bit more time in the beginning, but then you've got it. So it's your choice. A lot of people, the default's dynamic. A lot of times I just make it a fixed disk. Oh, I'm trying to move my slideshow. This is the real one. All right, I'm going to leave it as fixed. But I have the choice. You can say, yes, you recommended 10, but I really think I want something more. So I'm going to do it where I'm going to change it, and I can either drag it or just type it. It's easier for me to type. And I'm going to say, oh, this time I'll do 20. Okay. And you can see that I can go up to a couple terabytes if I really needed a virtual one to that. Up at the top, there's where it's going to store it. You see that there is a VirtualBox folder inside your user, and then the different ones will be here. There's a folder for this virtual machine, which has multiple files inside it, and the VDI is the virtual desktop image that we are creating. And so I'm going to say create, and again, you have the control over the size. And of course, you know, if it's a Windows one, you're going to have a lot more, a lot bigger size drive to store it. And then I hit create. And you can see we're going to create a 10 or 20 gig virtual. Depending on your computer, your processor, your RAM, it might take a little bit longer. But like I said, if you're doing a dynamic, it'll be faster, but then over time, it has to keep adjusting. I just say make it, and they don't have to worry about it. So now we have it all set up, and catch up to myself. Let's take a look. You have a whole set of settings that we have set up with VirtualBox. So I'm going to go to the settings, and so we can look at that. And there are some things that you can change on here. We've got the name that you can change. You could even change the type. I don't like changing things in the middle of a horse. Now, under advanced, notice I said that there were different files. VirtualBox can take snapshots, and we've talked about that in Linux, and that's sort of like a restore point in the Windows error, that you can do something, take a snapshot of that, and then do something else, and if it wrecks it up, you just go back to the previous snapshot. You also have the ability that you can share between your host and your guest through clipboard and drag and drop, and you just have to decide, do you want to be able to only go from host to guest, guest back to host, or both ways. I usually say, don't know for sure what I'm going to need, so I do it both ways. And then you can put a description in there if you want, and based on a workshop we had, you can encrypt yours. I don't worry so much about a virtual one that I do. Under the system, one of the things you can do, there's your memory, so you could adjust it if you needed to. Floppies are kind of like, very rarely would you find one. So what I usually do is I take the floppy and drop it down. It's just like your boot order in a regular computer. It'll do a optical drive first, then the hardware. The processor, if you happen to have multi-processors, then you could be able to assign processors to VirtualBox. I don't have that, so I don't worry about that. Under the display, if you wanted to, I'm going to do it here. I'm going to go with 48 megs for my video memory. If you had multiple monitors, you'd be able to mark which one gets that. You can also record what you're doing when you're doing a VirtualBox. I don't get into that. Here's our storage. There's our hard drive. There's our virtual hard drive right there. And then we also have an empty optical drive. We're going to use it later. You can have controls over your audio. Mostly I leave the default. We have network ability. That's automatically checked, so I can go on the internet with my virtual with no problem. If I had serial ports on my host machine, I could activate those. And of course, we have the USB. The default sticks with the USB 2, because just about everybody has 2s. If you really had 3s that you needed, you would switch it to go 3 and then backwards. You could share a folder with between your host and your guest if you need to be. And then the last choice is, this is how there's going to be a menu bar, and you can choose not to show it if you aren't going to need to be able to make some changes on the fly. You can just turn it off and you wouldn't see it at all. So that's pretty much there. Down at the bottom, these are your devices that you'll see that are on your computer. And right now, these are just to turn them on and off, but you can kind of get the idea that there's a hard drive. So, the hard drive, the disk, that's your network. And so it's going to be like the same icons you'd have in your operating system, but they're also letting you know that your VirtualBox has those same ones. Okay, so we got the settings all taken care of. Aha. Now we need to get our operating system that we're going to install, because right now there's nothing in it. We just have an empty hard drive that so we need to go out and get our Linux Mint. So we've talked before that the place that I think, and a number of us think is best, is to go to distrowatch.com. And that's because this is one site that has access to like 100 different ISOs, or 100 different distributions. And so we're going down the list. I'm going to mention again that this list is not to be thought of as the #1 operating system. This list deals with which ones are the most popular that people are looking at and checking. And you can see that in this last 6 months, MX Linux has had the most hits of going to that website. It does not mean that MX Linux is the top one. It's a good one. Right now, Endeavor has moved up. It is a version of Arch, and a lot of people are, oh, I've heard about that. Let's check it out. All right, so Mint, the one I want, so I'm going to pick on Mint, or I'm going to select Mint. The Mint website has all the different versions of, or the desktops for Mint. Ubuntu, which should probably be towards the top of the list, each desktop has its own website. And so if you would add all of the Ubuntus together, it would be right here up at the top. So we're going to go to Mint, and this is where I can find out all sorts of stuff about Mint. It's a Linux operating system based on Debian and the long-term Ubuntu, originated in Ireland. It comes with 3 desktops. It's good for beginners, desktops, and works well just live by thumb drives and stuff. And then when we scroll it down, we get links. All of these are reviews that you could read about, related websites. The one you want to go to is their download. And when I go to the download, it says, okay, here's the choices. You can do the cinnamon one, the mate one, or the XFC one. That's their 3 choices. I kind of like the middle one. That's my kind of favorite. So then you would go to download. Now, when you get to Linux Mint download page, it's going to be a 2 gig file. That's why we've had to go to DVDs and thumb drives. And when you look down here, here are all the places that you can go around the world to get it. So what we usually say is, when you have a choice, find one that's close to you, and so it might be a little bit faster. Or if you happen to have somebody tell you, oh, go here. Harvard School of Engineering sounds like that might be a really good place because they're engineers. I've used the James Madison because that's to the east of me, and I've used the Purdue Linux group because it's to the west of me. So it's your choice. And if you live in some part other than the United States, you can find all of these and your choice. So I've already downloaded, so I'm not going to do it again. I think I did it from the Purdue one. All right, so we have it. And to show you what I've done is, after I downloaded it, I moved it to a folder on my desktop for today's presentation. And so right there is the ISO. And remember that what we talked about before is that an ISO is a standardized file that is used to create the operating system. The ISO in Windows comes down as an exe file, so you just download that and you click it. With the Linux version, you need to use a device or a program. There's one called Rufus, one called Etcher, and some of just the regular old CD burning programs that we have an option to burn an image. And what that does is it takes that ISO file, puts it into a format that can be booted and installed. All right, so now we'll go back to our VirtualBox. So now I'm ready to start up with creating the installation. And let me get this menu out of my way because there's chats make my thing. So we're back to here. And now this time, there's the one I'm going to use because this is empty. And so now we're going to do a start. Now I can either right click and start, double click and start, or click the start arrow. Doesn't really matter which one you do. And so we're going to start this installation process. The first thing it's going to ask, and somebody emailed me this morning and said, how do I, and I'm going to say it's covered. The first thing they ask you, this normally is blank. Okay. It says, where is the installation file? And so all you do is you click on the folder to go find it. And in this one, it asks you where it is. Now, I have already gotten it, so you would have it blank. So you would just hit add. And now go get it where it is. Normally, it'll probably be in your download folder. For me, I have a partition that keeps all my ISOs, so I would go to it, and then you would select, that's the one I want. And then it is listed here. And so I'm going to say, that's the one I want. And we're going to choose that one. And so now it says, okay, now I know where to go. Now you would have the option that you can go to a file that's on your computer. I've done it when that's the ISO or the installation program is on a optical drive. And I've done it with when it's on a thumb drive. So you just go through your File Explorer type program and find it. And so we've got it right there. And it's not going to let me hit the start because see why we do it. Oh, good. Let's just go back and do. Try it again. That's why I love live. So what we'll do is we'll go down here to the storage. It says it's there. Try it once more. So I'm going to right click and remove it.
Does it need to be attached?
Yeah, but it won't attach.
Okay. That answers Kevin's question.
So I'm just going to call it Linux and not get it confused. I made 3 of them last night with no problems. What happens next is a normal installation. But I've got to get to that one so I can show you the custom.
Allie says if this doesn't work, try to make the HDD the first boot rather than the optical drive.
Yeah, well, there's nothing in the optical, so it's just going to skip it, but it's a
Okay.
good choice. Okay. Okay, so what's happened is that it already knows it, and I messed it up by saying, let's go find it, and it confused things. So normally what you would do, and the slide presentation shows it, you would do just what I did and go get it. See, it already knows about it. So now we're going to start the installation. All right, so this is going to be a very normal installation for the first little bit.
Kudo for having something go wrong and showing us how to fix it.
Oh, hey, that's why I said go live. If I had done it on the slideshow, we'd have been way through and you wouldn't have had this much fun.
And I say we're warts and all.
Absolutely. Notice that in Linux Mint, you go to the actual live distro and then you can get the install. Some distros, the menu pops up and says, what do you want to do? Do you want to install the operating system or do you want to try it? And Mint just says, you're going to try it first and then install it. All right, so we're going to go install. And this is what we've done before. And we're going to go 2 steps and then we'll make the new one. Pick your language. I can only read English, so really make sure you don't play around because you'll have no idea what it's saying and what buttons to push. And regular keyboard, so you want your keyboard to work. Now, I always install the multimedia codecs because I want to be able to watch videos of different kinds. By default, it wasn't marked because sometimes there's a little licensing issue about, you know, movies and stuff like that. And you can always get them afterwards. You can install it and then go get your multimedia. I just know I'm going to want it. What Mint doesn't do that some do is there's no option to get all your updates now. In the Linux Ubuntu, there'll be a checkbox that says, get all the updates now because that'll save time later. Well, I don't because it's going to take a lot longer. And 2, what happens if there's an update that isn't working right and it's going to crash your machine? You're not going to get anything installed. So I tell people, don't install the updates. Get your install, even if it's a regular install, get it done so that you can get on with it. So we'll continue. This will just take a little bit. And the reason I have a second one is I'm going to pretend that we're like on a cooking show because I'm going to not sit through an install. I'm going to, just like we don't do it on the baking show. All right, so when you get here, you've got 2 choices. Usually you have 2 or 3 choices. If it's a computer that is already running an operating system and you're installing Linux, it'll say, hey, I see you're running Windows or whatever. Do you want me to install it beside so you have a dual boot? Or do you want me to erase what's there and install this? And then there's something else. And last time we just went and said, erase it, install it. And we went through it and it was, ta-da, all done for us in a kind of default way. But we're going to today choose the something else so we can talk about partitioning and making it even better for you. And now we're going to switch back to our live. I mean, go back to the slides. There we go. And so let's go back. And because I'm in a virtual machine right now, some of the keyboard shortcuts don't work. So we'll do it this way. And this is what's fun. Just jump to the slides you want. All right, so the new focus today is talking about partitioning. And we're going to partition this Linux Mint to a way that most people would recommend. First off, we got to do a quick review about the partition tables, and we've talked about that before, but some of you might not have been there. And partition tables is just how does the computer cut up the piece of cut up the pie that you have in using it. There are two systems. We've got the older one that's based from a long time ago with DOS days, and it's called, a lot of times people call it MBR, which is master boot record, but that's not kind of 100% because even the other thing has a master boot record, but in just a little bit different form. So I think in Linux, we talk about it as MS-DOS, and the other one's called GPT. And these are the two choices. Now, the MS-DOS MBR is what came in the beginning, works on the older hardware, computers that still have BIOSes and not the new UEFI, and it has a limit because back in those days, we never even phantomed the idea that we would have a double terabyte hard drive. But it can work on up to 2. If you got more than 2 terabytes, you got to go with the newer one. And the GPT is the GUID partition table, which actually stands for the I had it written down because it confused you. It's tricky because Judy always says, what do they mean? And so it stands for the globally unique identifiers partitioning table. And that's partly goes with UEIF. So it works with the newer hardware, works with the UEIF. And the big difference is there's no limits to a drive size because it goes up to like 8 zettabytes, I think is the other word for it. So it could go up to huge. The MS-DOS had a limit of total of 4 pieces of pie. Yeah, that's all you could do. Except you could have a combination and have one of those pie pieces, a special one called an extended. And once you make an extended, you can cut that extended piece into however many you want up to some limit. So for primary is basically the ones that are bootable. So most systems would use one primary and then an extended that can be chopped up into whatever things it needs. And the extended partition contains logical partitions. So you have to kind of get that. There's one extended and then logical. These partitions are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, but the extended one usually is number 4. And then all of the logical ones are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, whatever. With the GPT, you can have up to like 128 partitions if you so needed to. So with GPT, you don't worry about how many you need. You can just keep going. And the new modern Windows uses GPT because they have a number of different files. If you've never looked at the file system for the hard drive, I did it the first time and I'm going, what are these partitions? But Windows has reserves and Windows has backup, and so GPT. All right, so now we know that you can pick. Either will work. Either the MS-DOS version or the GPT works. Like I said, it's based on hardware and things. So if we're going to talk about what are the different partition schemes that you can use to cut up your hard drive. Now, when we did the install before and just said do it, it makes an auto one. It usually creates a boot partition, or modern days it has to have a boot EFI for UEF. And then it has a single partition that's called root. It's identified with a slash, and everything is in there. Everybody's home for users, which includes all your Docus music. It's just like, for Windows, but it's everybody. So if there's multiple users, all of those users have their own home inside this root on this partition. Now, there may include a swap partition or a swap file. This is just like the old page thing in Windows, that there's extra RAM when needed. With the swap file, it's an expandable one. That's the new, more modern partition, is you assign some spot. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The problem with this is that if you have to reinstall your operating system, you lose everything, just like you would in Windows. Because when it reinstalls, it redoes it. All of the stuff is in the root, so bye-bye. So what I recommend, and a lot of people recommend, and it's not just for Linux, it's for Windows too, is to have your home separate from your root. So then you go into this, like we're going to do today with your customized, and you say, I want to have a root partition, and that's where my operating system is going to go. And then I want a home partition where all of my files are going to go. And then if I have to reinstall, all I will lose is the root operating system, but that's okay because I'm replacing that. But my home is sitting over here. It's like a detached garage. I'm going to rebuild my house, but my garage, it stays right there. Now, when you make a root, different things take different sizes. A good average for Linux is about 20. I think a good average for Windows is somewhere 50 to 75. I haven't looked to see lately, how much they were taking. And so you make a choice. If you're going to be doing a lot with this installation, you want to make a bigger bigger root so you can install more programs. And then you have your home, and 100 gigs would be adequate to store all your files. But again, it depends on two things. How big is your hard drive to start with, and what all you're going to keep. If you're somebody that does a lot of video editing and has lots of pictures, you need lots of room. Now, when we do this, you will find at least two partitions. The SDA used to stand for SCSI drive. Now we don't use SCSI drives. I would have changed it, because I'm a first grader, to HD, hard drive A, partition 1, hard drive A, partition 2. If you have a second hard drive, a physical hard drive, it would be hard drive B, and number it that way. Along with those two, you would have some sort of swap. Now, if the modern operating system has the swap file, it's created inside and expands. A lot of distros still use physical swaps, so you would make a swap file. Usually your swap file is determined by your RAM. If you have less than 2 gigs, you would double that up, because you need more than just 2 gigs. 2 to 8 gigs, they say, just match it. If you had an 8 gig of hard drive, your swap probably wouldn't need to be twice as much. And in fact, the more you get, the less it would go. Used to be, we talked about having at least 1.5 times your size. So you control that. If you have a lot of RAM on your computer, you probably don't even need a swap, because how are you going to use up all of your RAM? We also recommend that you put the swap at the end of your hard drive, so that if you need to adjust it, it's a lot easier. If you put it at the beginning and it needs to be bigger, you have a big chore that moves little by little everything over on your hard drive to make room. So put your operating system on first, because it's not going to change. Put your home, and then put your swap at the end. If you have a swap file, it would be SDA3. But some people put their swap at the beginning, so that would be SDA1, your root would be 2, and your home would be 3. And that's the recommended one because of the security of, if I need to reinstall, my home is protected. Now, other people will tell you that there are other partitions that people make. I don't. Others people would do. Some people would make a boot partition right at the very beginning with all the instructions on booting up your computer. It's included in root by default, but some people think it's better to have it outside of root. There's a folder in Linux that's a temporary stuff, and it can fill up and take up a lot of room. And we found that on even Windows. All of a sudden, our hard drive is full because a lot of temp files or a lot of log files or a lot of junk has been created and just fills up your hard drive. So if you put it into a separate partition, it can just fill up that and your computer won't have a problem. The same thing for a var variable. You get data in that can get bigger. And some people pull out, there's a log folder, and Linux and Windows, they all have log folders, and pull it out separate so that it doesn't fill up your operating system. But you can go back and just do the very basic one that the auto one does, but I recommend doing it with the separate root and home so that you protect your stuff. Yes, you're still going to be backing up your data files all the time, but if you have to reinstall, it's very easy. You just reinstall the operating system. Now, I do have a few extra partitions and that I use. One is called an ISO. That's where I keep all the ISOs I download for use in the future in virtual machines, or I burn them to thumb drives to be able to take somewhere. I actually usually move my VBox outside of my home because it can take up a lot of room, and put it on a special place. For those people who are using a dual boot with Windows and Linux, you need to have a partition that I called shared, because Windows cannot read the Linux partitioning platform. Linux can read Windows, so least common denominator, you need to make a shared file that's an NTSF, and both can read it. And again, partitioning size always depends on how big a hard drive you have. And sometimes, on my laptop, I've got a lot of room on it, so I have 2 primary partitions because I'm dual booting, and then I have a shared home that everybody can get to, and it just depends on what works best for you. All right, so let's go back to finishing. So we're going to do something else. And so as you can see, it says, okay, you've got a hard drive. Okay, and it says it's about a 21 gig one. I said 20, and that rounds it to what it wants. So we need to start the new partition table. By default, this one is going to do the DOS one, and I'm going to say continue. So I have 21,474 megabytes of free. Now this is a very compressed because it's a virtual machine. So I want to have a root partition, and so I'm going to say I want a new partition. Do you want to use the whole thing? Nope. I want to do, key, got to show the keyboard keys. 10,000 approximate megabytes would be giving me a 10 gig one. And notice I can choose between primary and logical. I'm going to make this a primary one because it's the one I want to boot. If I click on what am I going to use it as, you can see that these are all the different kind of formatting I can do. EX4 is the newest version of the standard Linux. ButterFS or BetterFS is one of the newest ones. XFC, XFS, and JFS. Everybody's making new things. There for you people who are been computing for a long time, I can go back to the old FAT 16 days. No thanks. Or I can do the FAT 32. I can make it a swap. I can make it a volume for encryption, or I can say don't even use this. Since this is a Linux one, the option for an NTFS isn't listed because we're making a Linux one. But you have that option when you're setting things up. Now, for a real computer, I would be probably using a program called gparted or Partition Magic. That's an actual partitioning program and set up my hard drive that way. We're just doing a virtual, so I'm using theirs. So I'm going to make an ext4. Now I'm going to mount this, and mounting means I'm going to set it up to run where. And when I do my choices, you can see there's that slash, which is root. That's my operating system. And you can see the ones that we were talking about earlier. There's the one for making a boot one, a temp for user files, the var, a different one. There's an optional one that can be for your extra software, and one called user local. This is going to be root, 1000, start at the beginning, and a primary. So I'm going to say okay. And now I have a partition that we're going to use and format that's about 10 gigs. Okay, now I want a home. So I'm going to say, okay, I've still got free space left. I'll do a home, add that. And notice now that we've got our one primary, it says, oh, most people go with the logical, which means create a extended one and then put logical behind it. So I'm going to do it that way to show you, then I'm going to go back and do it the other way. So this is going to be a logical one, and I only want it to be 9850 because I have to have some room for my swap. And I'm going to do it at the beginning of that space. It's going to be an ext, and this time I'm going to say we're going to be my home. This is where all of my files are going to be separated and keep apart for my protection, and say okay. Now notice here we have an ext, and then we have a number 5 because the extended one is there. It just doesn't show in this list. In like the gparted program I use, it would make first an extended that would be full, and then underneath that it would list the other ones. And so that's why it jumped to number 5, because primary is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, extended would be 4, and then these would be 5. All right, I still have some room left. I need my swap. And so I'm going to say use that one, use the whole thing up. Still going to be ext4? No, because this is a special swap area. And so I switched it to that. The computer knows that. And I say, okay. And so now SDA6, these are both under the main number 4. And so there's the typical one to start. And then I could keep, if I had more room, I could continue under the ext4, which doesn't, I mean the SDA4, which doesn't show here, and make a whole bunch more choices and divide it up as much as I want. But you know, you can make bunches. Now I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. and I'm going to start again. So here's the free space. I say I want this to be primary, just like before, 10,000 at the start, 4, and root. And because I'm not going to do more than 4, I'm going to make each of them, a primary just by choice. It won't work any different, but I'm going to say this one, make it a primary one. And I said this is going to be what, 98, 9850. And all of these sizes are up to you. What you're doing, you just have to kind of beforehand, and that's going to be the home. And now it's an EXT SDA2. So it's a primary partition. And then with the last free ones, I'm going to make a primary swap. Okay. And it's just there. It's just that you have a choice of which way. Somebody might have a reasoning to always go with the extended after you do your one primary for your root system. Everybody gets choices. Do it the way you want to do it. All right, and then I would hit install, and it would tell me, okay, here's what we're doing. I'm going to make a partition 1 that's going to be ext4, that's going to be root. I'm going to do a partition 2, it's going to be ext4, it's going to be home, and the free swap. And if I hit continue, then it's going to go. But like in the cooking show, I don't want to sit through a very short. It'll only take a few minutes, but let's move on. So I'm going to quit. Oops, quit. Yes. And then I'm going to shut down this live. Remember, I'm still running live in here. And I'm going to shut down. Okay. Just to show you, I'm going to go into the one I made the other day that has no partition. So you can see that when we get to here. All right, so what you missed was what you don't see. You just sit there and they watch a little slideshow, talk to you all about your operating system, and then it reboots. Now, what we didn't see is that in my install, you have to tell them what time zone you're in, and you got to give them a password and a username. For VirtualBoxes, I always use VBox, so I don't have to remember because this is just a trial. And my password is always capital V, capital B, OX. This way, I can take this VirtualBox file and give it to somebody else, and they know what the password is. I don't have to say, oops, I'm putting my own password on. I don't want them to know it. So I just make it VBox. This is just for testing out. If it was a real operating system, of course, you would put it. And I am connected. So this is a regular running Linux inside my Windows machine. And I can do everything. I've got, all the software. I've got internet connection, it said. I've got updates to do, correct date and time. So I'm going to go in and show you under the disk program. Windows has something like this. And here's what it looks like. Here's the file system, the partition 1, it's a FAT file system, and that's the boot up. And then it made an extended partition. So this is the boot to get the machine going. See down here, it's a FAT32, kind of based on Windows 95. And then over here, the rest of the is an extended partition, and there's a file system. Now, if I wanted, I could shrink this down and create some other partitions in there. But I just wanted to show you, this is what the default is going to be. A boot partition and then everything is in here.
I have a question.
Yep.
Why aren't you using /boot as a mounting point for a partition? Doesn't Linux need this?
Boot is in root. Some people think that it works better if you put boot outside of root, because that's what this is right here. So right here, this partition 5, that is my whole operating system, which is root and everything else. It's just that outside of that, they put a boot. I'll show you the next one, and you'll see that in the next one, boot is in part of the / by itself. So it's kind of a choice. Most people say you don't really need to put boot outside of root. It's already there. But some people like it better. So now if we close out this one and quit. And we go to the one that's already done. Oh, good time. Now this one is one I've done just like we did today with a custom install. Secret password.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Do you have to do this every time you set up your VirtualBox?
You only set it up once and then you run it.
Okay, thank you. That was from me.
Yeah. All of those that are listed there that are sitting idle are created ones. And that's why I could go quickly to the one that was just partitioned with one. All right, so I'm going to go back. I'll tell you about why this one looks different in a little bit, but I'll go back to that disk program. And this time you'll see that this is what we did. We divided this into 3 partitions. And so partition 1 is my bootable, and this happens to be root. The boot partition is inside of root. Here is my file system that is my home. See, it says mounted at home. See, that one says mounted at root. There's home. And then swap or partition 3, there's my swap, and it's active, ready to be used. So this makes it so that if I want to change my distro in Linux, I can just reinstall here. Keeps my files all private. Let's see, what else do I want to show you one here? If I had done it the other way, this would have been partition 1, and this would have looked like split. Remember, the top half said all of this is under an extended, and then it had 2 parts or 3 parts or 4. It depends. You with GPT, everything can be a primary partition. You can have 128 of those, or you can have one partition, and under extended, under the old way, you could have 64, maybe is what they said, 64 smaller logical things underneath that. All right, now what you're noticing here is that this is Linux Mint in this big window, and down at the very bottom, you can still see there is my taskbar for Windows 10. So I'm running Linux inside of Windows 10. And the bottom bar, that's Windows 10. This status bar, this is VirtualBox. And you can see that there's an icon for my hard drive. There's for my optical drive. There's my audio. There's my network. There's my USB, nothing plugged in. There's my shared folder. There's my video memory. Recording is disabled. So these are the controls that you have for that. And then here's my Linux. And so am running it. Now, one of the things you can do with that extended, the guest editions, is that I can go up to my view and say, I want to be full screen. And when I do that, this is where we have fun with people thinking that, oh, you're running Linux, or I could do the opposite. I could be running a virtual Windows, but I'm really running it inside of Linux. But right now you don't see anything that indicates Windows because I'm full screen. And then I can do a pop-up menu. And this is the menu I said earlier could be removed if you didn't want it there, but I sometimes want to change. You have shortcut keys that you could change, but you also have to worry about that there are some keys that are used by the host, some that are used by the guest. And like right now, I'm supposed to be host F to get back to where you could see my Windows toolbar, but host is my right control key. If I go host F, oh, it did work this time. Last time it didn't because it went to the find command because the control F was fine. Ah, good. So there's something that's working today that wasn't working. Now, to get the guest editions, you would have to come up. Let me see, get out of full screen. Oh, now put it back in. Let me get out of this one because I'm going to show you the one that doesn't have it. And so I'm going to go quit and shut down. And let's go to this one that says no guest edition, because you'll see that this one doesn't go as big as a screen when it runs. Because here, if I say I want to view full screen, all it does is put it inside a black backdrop. And if I go to VBox, and again, it doesn't matter if I was running Windows 10 inside of Windows 10, there's no difference. You just pop up and have Windows 10. It's the same part. See, if I go right now and say view, I am in full screen. But that's because there are a few things that aren't showing there. So I'm going to go out of it to get my menu back at the top so you can see. Okay, so here's my menu up at the top. I can make this there. We'll do it that way. And again, it's still full screen, but the actual virtual machine is smaller. If I go to devices, let me talk about do this two-part. Under devices, you'll see categories for devices. And what's really nice about a virtual machine is anything I have on my real computer, I can make use of in the virtual one. And I'm not going to do it exactly right now because it could cause me a little trouble. But if I go to optical drive, I can choose, right now I've got a virtual one. I could say use my computer's optical drive. Audio is already being used, but let's go to USB. Here are all my USB right now. I have my webcam. I've got my headset. I've got my keyboard, and I've got my mouse. Right now, it's being used by my desktop. Once I click inside of VirtualBox, keyboard and mouse go there. But my VirtualBox doesn't have use of a USB thumb drive, doesn't have use of my camera or my headset, but I could. If I would go to the USB and if I would click on my webcam, now the virtual machine would have access to a webcam, but I wouldn't because it was removed from Windows 10 and you wouldn't see me anymore. But a lot of times we would use this for transferring thumb drives back and forth between host machine, virtual machine, and headphones or whatever. So, you know, the virtual machine actually uses all the devices, or can use all the devices that are on your host machine. And so there's a specific category for the webcam. And so if I click that, you would not see me. I would have to go into virtual machine. I can open up a program in Linux Mint called Cheese if it was there, and then you would see me on that one. There's talking about the shared, and there's the clipboard. So that's all the things that you can share. Notice in this one, I did not set it up, but I could change it. All right, so to get the guest edition so that we can do more things, you just come to device and say, insert it. And we go tick, 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 tick. Tick, 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 come on. And if I go, there we go. And it says open the prompt because install it and run it, because that's an administrative program. I got to do that secret VBox password. And now we are installing the stuff. This will work automatic for some distros, manual for others. And so the first choice is you just say install it, reboot, and see if it works. If it doesn't, then what you can do is you can mount it like we did in the settings. So it's getting ready to set. Because when I reboot, I should be able to go to full screen. And it says you'll have to be restarting. So I close that window. And then I quit and restart, and we should be able to have full screen now and other features that come with the additions. Some of them you don't have to go through what I did. You just put it there and it automatically installs. So there it is. I'm connected. Go up to virtual, and now notice the difference. See, the seamless mode is active, and adjust the window size. And so now if I go to full screen, ta-da, you would have no idea that I'm running a virtual machine that is inside of Windows 10. Now, in the menu system, there's where I can shut down. There's where I have the views mostly. And what happens, a lot of times people will turn off this. Let's say you're making a video of how to do something in Windows, your virtual Windows 10. You don't want that thing keep popping up. You turn it off for a while. And then you can shut it off. And again, there's the devices that I have access to switch. Now, getting out of here, I'll just do it this way. You can shut down the virtual machine, but it's always best to shut down the host machine and then shut down your virtual machine. So I'm going to quit. And show you. If I go to this, so here's what we were in, and you can see that in the storage, I have now running virtual guest editions on my optical drive. Now I could create another one. It's possible I could create a second hard drive and put a different operating system and then have a dual boot virtual machine. Kind of crazy, but a lot of times you can do things. So in this one, you'll see that in the storage, it doesn't have virtual guest editions. So what I could do would be to go and choose a file. I'd probably have to go to my program files, go to Oracle, VirtualBox. There's my guest editions, and just add that if it wouldn't do it automatic. So there it goes. I can have as many virtual machines based on how much space I have, because they take up a full amount of space. You know, each of these are taking up about 20 gigs. And if a Windows was on here, it would be taking up between 50 and maybe 100 gigs to do it. And I think we're done. And so hopefully, and like I said, the slideshow that I have goes into every step. I just took screenshot after screenshot, and I'm going to go back in and add, before I send it to Judy, the part about adding the virtual editions if it doesn't do it automatic on that. And I stop. And this is where I say to Cal, anything that you wanted to add to either virtual machines or to custom installs? You have to unmute.
Well, you can also get virtual machines from your Linux distro, especially now with the containers. And I guess the question I have is, why don't they always add guest editions as a standard part of the package?
And I've wondered that same thing, because there have been times where I've had to really fight. There are some distros, and maybe that's why, that won't accept them. I've had some virtual machines that I cannot make it go full screen because I cannot get it to install that guest edition. I don't know. Obviously, there are some people who say, I just want the base thing to use really quick. A lot of people use virtual machines on servers, and so they can be running different kinds of operating systems, and they don't need to have full screen. They don't need to share. They just need it to run. So we said, start it up and get it going. And some people like me, I'd like those to make it full screen, to make it a little bit larger so I can see on that. But that's a choice that the designers said, this is not required of everybody. So those who want it, get it. Oh, good. Or's back. I'll get him in here. Anything else, Cal?
When you, at the very end, when you got rid of the...
Cal, your mic is a little bit too loud for me. I don't know about anybody else. Maybe you can bring the volume down a little bit on that, because we're all old, but.
Okay. That's better?
Yeah.
Okay, when at the end, when you hit the menu, that little white menu bar at the bottom.
Correct.
Once you get rid of it, can you get it back without stopping the machine?
I think that there's a shortcut to get it back. I'd have to go and well, I can do that. I can go to my settings, user interface. I just have enable or don't enable. I'd have to go look in and see. But like I said, the people that usually turn it off are people who are making videos and doing a review of a operating system in a virtual situation, and they don't want that to keep popping up. They aren't going to need it. And a lot of times, like, you know, for me right now, I've got VirtualBox running in a alternate desktop, so I can go back and forth between Zoom and that without having to close out and see things. Or if I see you're back, your turn. Did you have anything that you're going to help me make this better? See if he gets back in there.
Sorry, I was on my phone.
That's okay.
I only had one comment that occurred to me while you were going through the possible partitions on the VM.
Yep.
The temp directory.
Yeah.
You can make it a partition or a directory. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to mention to the folks who are considering using it, don't use it as storage. More and more of the distributions on boot are purging everything in the temp directory. It's meant for transient files, not for storage. A lot of people got zinged by that when their popular distro started purging temp on boot.
Yeah. Here's the way to really think about it. Because in Linux, that first slash says this is root stuff, and the temp belongs to root, so they can do what they want with it. If you wanted a temporary file, you could put it in your home and have a /home John temp, and that would be yours to do with whatever. The reason for putting the temp in a container like that is to keep it from getting too big. We've had it on Windows machines and Linux machines. All of a sudden, like I said, it fills up, and you go find out that for some reason, the operating system has been generating report after report after report, or log after log, and all of a sudden it expands and fills up your hard drive, and then you have to go find that where it is and say, oh, dump all of this temp stuff or all these logs. So people have made those into a container and said, okay, it's not going to get any bigger than this, and it doesn't affect my operating system's space.
Hey, John.
Thanks. Yes.
You're talking about logs, typically that go in /var/logs.
Yeah.
Modern distros, you can specify how large any given program's log file is.
Good.
And it will tar it up to make it smaller, compress it, create a new log file, and you can tell it, after you've got X number of megabytes of files or X number of files, purge the oldest X number.
Okay.
So you can do a much better job of managing logs.
See, got to have my back guys. Yes, Judy.
Is it time for questions?
I think it can be. Unless they pipe in with something. Oh, yes.
They can do that at any time.
Anytime. Yeah.
Where can you get the Mac OS ISO?
Where's
John,
a Mac? Where's a Mac person? I don't know.
John Carter, do you know the answer to that?
You'd have to type it.
We'll see if he does. I'll keep my eyes peeled. When choosing to enable VM snapshots, doesn't that take additional storage in the host and not in the guest OS?
That would be correct. But unless you put your virtual machine, I put my virtual machine folders in a separate area, and then that puts all that stuff over there and doesn't fill up my host. But it is, yeah. It's just like on all of your Windows back when you had the days with restore points. You would have all of those restore points filling up your host computer, and so it's just a matter of you managing it. But how many snapshots do you need? Just the most recent. Some people said that's all I want, the one that I had before I started messing around with it.
You showed the download of the additional package for VirtualBox at the beginning, but you didn't show how you added that into VirtualBox when you opened it up the first time. Can you show us how you add this in?
No.
Okay, I'll cross that off.
Well, because they missed the part that it's two different programs. You install the VirtualBox and then you install it. It's just a second program, and it knows to install itself inside it. There's nothing to see.
Okay.
So it's a two-step process. It would be very similar in LibreOffice. You can install LibreOffice, and then you can install the help file to run inside of LibreOffice. but you have to install LibreOffice first, then the help file. So, it's not something that you have to do anything magic. Just run it. It'd be an install exe file in Windows, and just do it, and it adds it.
Cool. Luckily, I just crossed these off as I read them to you. About the Mac question, you have to buy a Mac. Of course, Apple no longer sells their OS separately.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing, with Windows, you can have a Windows VM because you just download that, use the Windows upload assist guy, and you can get one, but you've got the problems that if you can't maybe upgrade it and you can't maybe do some updates, but at least you can run it for free. And
another comment, I think if you go to Apple's site, you can, with a bit of hunting, download an installer that might allow you to create an ISO. And a third one, there is a link where to go and get it, and that will be in the follow-up Q&A information for everybody. Leopard is still available as a CD from individuals, not from Apple. If you choose erase disk and install Mint, it doesn't affect the host operating system, does it?
No, because you're inside the environment of your guest, and you just need to make sure. I always make sure I know that I'm creating a 25 or 30 gig partition, and so I just look at that and say, oh yeah, that's the same partition. But no, I have not lost an operating system as long as I've been inside VirtualBox, and Cal and Orr always pipe in.
A comment for a boot partition, BTRFS requires it, and Red Hat is one that requires it.
Well, requires, it's the default if you don't pick something else.
Which looks to me like you choose something else. The second program, did John download that one, the extension pack? Does each individual Linux distro have their own extension pack?
There's just one extension pack because it runs inside of VirtualBox. So you don't have to have a separate one for each operating system. It's just something that extends the features of VirtualBox. Okay. Like I say, it's just a second file. They download them one after the other and then install one after the other.
But if you choose something other than Mint, they have their own?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Remember, it has to be super simple.
Yep. When you go to the VirtualBox website, you'll see different versions of VirtualBox and only one link for extension.
Okay. Just for clarification, all installed software programs get installed in the root partition, correct? If correct, the planning needs to consider how much software one will install in the future and how large to plan for the root partition, correct?
And that's on the slide. It says that, the size depends on how much you're going to do. If you're just wanting to do a quick, dirty test of a distro, see, in Linux, it's the kind of thing where each version of Linux comes with almost everything you need. You don't need to go install anything more. So if you just want to do a quick test, not big. If you're going to be adding things and saving files, then.
Would running in the virtual machine protect the host computer against malware, like ransomware? If it should attack the virtual machine, would the host computer still remain safe? My
answer is yes.
Probably.
Or
well, it can, if it eats through the virtual machine hypervisor, that's a lot of extra work. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult.
Yeah. Because it's a separate machine, and maybe if you're allowing all that easy file sharing or whatever. But again, if you're running it on a Linux host, if I'm running Windows or Linux on a Linux host, the security that Linux has, things aren't going to run unless I allow it to run. So something might try to cross the river, but nothing's going to happen there.
If I have a Linux PC and I want to install a Windows OS in VirtualBox on that Linux PC, I presume that I would have to have a unique license that is a license not used elsewhere for that specific Windows OS, correct?
Half correct. I can run a Windows Linux that is not authorized. But again, it limits you. You can't get to the store probably. You can't get any updates. You can just run it to test it out. I would use that. So if somebody called me with a Windows problem, I could say, okay, let me look at mine. You tell me, here's what it does. I remember in the older days that Linux or a Windows with unauthorized would run for so many days, and then stop.
Mhm.
Well, you just make a new VirtualBox and you got another 90 days.
At the end of, this is me, at the end of the Q&A, before we go, the chat box, before we go into live, can you demo the snapshot feature?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so tuck that away in your memory. You might have explained this, but why are you using Windows as your host system today?
Because most of you people are Windows users. You haven't converted to the good one yet.
You tell him, John, you tell him.
I think he means we're all on the dark side.
Well, I
Go
had
ahead.
to bow out of directly involvement because most of my experience here with VMware or VirtualBox is running it on Linux to run a virtual Windows machine.
Just the opposite.
Yeah.
But the point being, there's a lot of flexibility. A lot of guys test out new Linux distros in a VirtualBox on their Linux machine.
Right.
And
That's the
when
perfect thing.
the person who asked that question demoed it at our meeting, we had Windows 10 within Windows 10, and that's where I was introduced to elementary with the long peer. And then we had a 1,000-year-old version of Windows all at the same time, and it was really a lot of fun. He's having a problem sharing USB from a Linux host. None of his USB ports are enabled. Any suggestions?
Did they go? Well, yeah, different one. But he's going up to the devices and checking the box to say release it from the host and give it to the guest. And then you have to do the same thing. If you want to use it back on the host, you have to unrelease it from the guest so that the host can use it. So we need to check to make sure he's going through the devices and activating it to one or the other place.
Yeah. Physical devices can't be shared between the two OSs, one or the other.
And my answer was try another port. Oh, well. A follow-up to the Windows 10 serial number type stuff. If so, does this mean that I cannot use a Windows 7 license that was used on a Windows 7 installation that was upgraded to 10? Does that Windows 7 license get nullified at Microsoft? And would it prevent a Windows 7 installation in VirtualBox on a Linux PC because it can't or won't be authenticated by Microsoft?
Windows question. My understanding is that that license is good for a single machine, and if it is no longer running. But the problem is Windows 7 to go to Windows 10, 10 uses that Windows 7 license to activate your 10. So I guess technically 10 is using that one unless you went and bought it outright. But again, a virtual machine, usually you can run it to test things and do things, you know, like run the Windows Media video editing program.
Is the guest editions the same as the VM VirtualBox extension pack?
Say again, please.
Is the guest editions the same as the VM VirtualBox extension pack?
Let's see. I'm looking at their website and I see VirtualBox and I see VirtualBox extension packs. That's all. There's a developer's kit if you're a developer. I'm not. So Yeah, the VirtualBox personal. Yeah,
I think this puts all together the license issue. Repeat how to go to Windows OS for a VM. Do I need a serial number?
no. What you go to that Windows Upgrade Assist, download the file, and then what's supposed to happen is when you do an install, because we do this on our refurbished ones, do it faster. When it comes up to ask you if you have a license, you say skip this. And
Okay,
then you can,
I'm gonna say, please don't put any more questions in the chat box so we can go to live. I'll answer the ones that are here, and then that's it for me. Do you have to keep the extensions virtual DVD in the virtual drive, or does it get installed? Can you then put your own DVD in?
create a second DVD.
And John Carter says malware viruses can jump over to the host if, capitals, volumes directories are being shared across host guest.
Yeah, and that's why all I do is mainly would just be to do copy paste or that part, not share folders and things.
Remember, that only applies if the host and the guest are the same OS.
Right, yeah. It's like I said, if I'm running Windows and stuff comes into Linux, it's not going to do anything because I have to allow it. It cannot run by itself.
And it wouldn't run anyway. It's expecting Windows system calls instead of Linux calls.
Correct. EXT file or exe files and all.
Can you set up the virtual network so that the virtual system has access to the internet, but the host system does not?
I don't think so, because it's got to go through your host's network to get out.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know, just on, Orv would probably say, yeah, I knew that I've been taught with doing I'm learning to do the SSHing, that you can SSH from your virtual machine to your host machine. Neat.
I'm sure you defined SSH before.
Secure shell.
Thank you.
Command line.
Got the command line. You explained MGR and GPT, but this person, Dennis, did not notice whether his installation procedure today changed depending on whether he had MGR or GPT. Does it?
MBR is the one that is the old DOS one, and that would only allow you up to maximum of 4 primary partitions, or one extended plus 3. If you're using GPT, you've got unlimited partitions that you could make.
Carter says he's on a Mac running Windows and Linux.
Good for him.
Yep, it goes all different ways.
Yeah, yeah.
Mike says he has the same problem. His guest is not seeing his USB device to see my Windows install flash drive on my Linux host. He says, I'll play with it.
Yeah. And who knows what Windows will say, no, you can't do this. I won't share. I'm taking my ball and go home.
Can a home partition be shared between multiple VMs if the VM is set up to multi-boot?
If the VM is set to multi-boot, both users are inside that VM. And so, yes, they can share a home, but 2 separate VMs would have to have a shared folder on the host that they could access.
Thank you so much. Over to live Q&A. Mr. Kennedy, outstanding presentation, many comments about it's like a class, and that's what you aim to do.
Yeah.
Okay,
if you have a question or comment to share, please use your reactions to raise your hand so that your name goes to the top of the list, like Andy's has done, because with multiple screens, it's too hard to go back and forth looking for you. So use your reactions and raise your hand. So Andy, you got your hand up?
I'm all finished. You took care of that. Was the home partition among multiple VMs.
Oh, okay.
I
Yay.
didn't know, because it's assigned different IDs behind the scenes. I didn't know if one would whack the other. If I set up a VM and I have Linux distro 1, and then I add Linux distro 2 and point it to the same home directory, is one going to overwrite the other?
I don't think you can point them to the same directory. You can point them to a same shared folder.
No, the same partition.
Oh, in the same partition. Okay, I can answer that question.
A common home partition.
Yeah, that will depend on the distro that you are using. I have discovered, and Orv will probably agree, that there are some distros. I've done this myself. I have installed one distro, installed a second, and had them set up to use the same home. Because remember when I did the custom install, what you would do to it, the next install, you would uncheck format the home and just say use that home. Well, the problem is the two distros have a little bit of formatting difference in their structure. And so distro 2 locked out the home directory for distro 1. When I went back in and reinstalled 1, it locked out the home directory. So what I'm saying is I have no problem with the Debian family. Any distro in the Debian family can coexist in dual boot and share a home drive. But you might run into problems if you installed an Arch or a Red Hat along with those. They might not play nicely. And I don't know exactly which one they do.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Perfectly explains it. The reason for something like that, there are a couple of script files that I like running on Linux, but they're cross-platform. They're generic, and I'd like to run them on whether it's a Manjaro, Mandriva, the Ubuntu family, whatever, and to have them in a common area, typically what I would call home. But no, you answered the question perfectly. If I'm going, instead of sticking within the Debian family or Ubuntu, if I'm going somewhere else, I'm probably better off looking for another alternative, a shared folder,
right,
as opposed to common home.
And like what I said on the way I've set it up is that in your case, I would have done two primary partitions for the two operating routes, and then not create a separate home. Each home would be in theirs, but then I would create a partition that's just called shared.
Right.
And both of them can access that.
Nope. Thank you. Thank you. Perfectly explained.
Yeah, I would add the problem is that the home partition has hidden folders with configuration files, and that's why one distro can conflict with another.
Absolutely.
Okay, real quick, how do I send off a virtual attaboy to you guys?
Oh, you go down to reactions and hit the thumbs up.
Or you could send a physical attaboy, a 6-pack or something. I don't know.
What's wrong with money? Here.
Money works.
Or you can put it in the chat box, okay?
Any other comments or questions? I hope that those few people I've been in contact with over the last month or so who've had questions about VirtualBox have got their answers, and those who have had questions about doing custom installs have had their questions answered. Dennis, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. One thing I want to clarify, John, was about, you went through and you created the different partitions and the different, setting up the different sizes. So when you're all done with this and you shut your computer off for the day, then you come back the next day, turn your computer on, you now have this VirtualBox thing available. Is all the space that you had allocated for swap and root and boot and everything, all that has permanently taken up all that space on your hard drive, or does only part of it permanent and the other parts kind of just use what it needs when it's executing?
It would be allocated unless you did that dynamic hard drive, which says that I will only use up as much as I need and then increase until I get to the limit you've set. And so in that case, if I had set it up for a 20 gig hard drive and the install only needed 10, it would only use up 10. And then as it needed more, it would go until it got to 20, and then it wouldn't be able to go anymore. Just like a regular hard drive fills up and says, hey, I can't do any more in that.
Okay, so, and if you're in your Windows computer, when you log on, you do, you know, Explorer or whatever, can you see the Linux stuff, partitions, and can you back them up from there, or no?
I can see it, yeah, because there's a folder when you go into your home, because it's in my home right now. So if I go to my home and go to my user and I go to this user, there is a folder called .virtualbox. So it's, you know, it's a hidden folder because they don't need to see it. No, I have a folder called virtual VMs. And let me do the share on this. Because I also promised Judy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look, I'm in my user called VTC Zoom, and right down here at the bottom, I have a VirtualBox VMs. When I open that, you'll see there's all the ones I've created. And if I go into the final one, you'll see that there was a previous one because I had changed the name, I think. There's the logs for all of what's been going on. There's the actual VDI, and I can share that with somebody. And then there's the actual VBox, that the blue one is what you double click to start it up. So all of these are in there, and you'll see that this Linux Mint VDI, it's almost 10 gigs. And that's why I said it. I said, you know, create a hard drive, 10 gigs. And
did you say or imply, or did I mishear, that you could copy, let's say this, one of your Linux Mint Mate to maybe this drive and move it to another computer and it'll run just with all the settings?
Yes. And that's why I use a generic username and password, because I don't want to say, oops, I have to give you my password. So yeah, because this one's already set up, customized, and so somebody doesn't have to go through the trouble. They would just go to your VirtualBox, and when it said new, you'd say, don't create a hard drive, go to the VDI that I have already done. And then it's there. It's, you know, very similar to if I create a PowerPoint and I send it to Orv, he can open it up.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back.
It's Bud's turn.
I thought it was your turn. You asked.
No, it's not my turn. It's a question. So do it when you're all finished with your Q&A.
Oh, at the very end.
Yeah, at the very end now.
Okay.
Since we've carried on.
Okay, I'll stop sharing then. Okay, Bud's turn.
Okay. First of all, great job, John. You've answered a lot of questions I had on VirtualBox. Unfortunately, I got a call from my doctor in the middle of your presentation, and I missed how you actually activated the guest edition part. And that guest edition part is something that I've been trying to figure out, is how the heck you get a full screen in VirtualBox.
Yeah. The simple is it's supposed to be that you go up to the top menu of devices, and then it says install guest editions.
Okay, cool.
But There's always a but. It sometimes doesn't do it. So the second step is that you would go in, and I'll make new slides for that part. You'd go into your settings, and where you have your empty optical drive, you click on that and say load the guest editions.
Okay.
And then it should work. The third way is you would go into the folder and execute it, where you'd have to maybe run it as an admin and you'd see it doing an install. But it's supposed to be just do it, just say, excuse me, install it, second choice, connect it to the drive, and then third choice. But that's the easy way to do it. Not that hard.
Okay, thank you.
Over to Steve.
Thing I'd like to be able to do is to clone the operating system that I've got on Windows 10 now and have that in a virtual box. Is that possible to do?
Okay, Orv, where are you?
Yes, that's exactly what I did. Fortunately, as Windows has matured, take that for what it's worth, it's become much easier. There are a number of programs out there that will let you take an image of a physical disk, and that's the one you actually import as a new, you copy it over, and that becomes your virtual disk.
Yeah,
and you fire that up. It used to be a number of years ago, if Windows woke up in a different hardware environment, it would have a hissy fit. Yes, but recently I've read and experienced that it's much more tolerant of that now. I think there were just a couple minor things I had to tweak once it woke up as a VM. So yeah, it can be done. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the program I use. There's a number of them out there.
So you
Took
could
a while
use
though.
You could use a Cronus to do that. That is an image and backup
Good.
program. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not going to open up the 400-page manual, but I am pretty sure that
30.
in section here, there's a whole section in the manual about cloning. So there may be a way that it tells you how to do it. But Orv was right. You know, you can use any of the programs that clone. We would use CloneZilla and do that. So also I'd check that manual because there was a whole section on I think on cloning.
Cool. Over to Dale. Please unmute your. Thank you.
Yes, I've put in a solid drive on one of the computers, and I put in Windows 10, and I didn't partition it. Is it possible to partition it after it's already loaded?
Absolutely. You just go into Disk Manager, which has been around for a while, and it would be just it would show you that this is your partition. When you right click in Windows, it's called shrink, and you can then shrink the drive, and then it leaves an empty space. Then you can make a new partition in there. So yeah, you got to go to that. However, anybody knows the shortcut into getting to your Disk Manager. And
Hey, John?
yeah,
You'd need that if you were going to dual boot, but VirtualBox is just another program on your existing C drive.
oh, I guess we should ask Dale, why were you going to shrink Windows 10?
I wanted to partition the drive so that I could use it sort of like what you did with the Linux. And I needed to replace a drive. So I finally got the 10 on there, and then I forgot to put the partitions in first.
Okay, so you'd like to have a separate partition for something, this and that, and whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, you go into the I guess I could look it up, but you go into the Disk Manager, and then you'll see there's your drive, and you can right click on it and choose shrink, and then shrink it down as much as you want it. I think if somebody else who's a real strong Windows user, I think that there's an automatic shrink that it'll shrink it down to automatically keep enough room for Windows to operate and then give you extra. So yeah, I've done that before for people who have said, you know, I want to keep my home separate. So go in there, shrink windows, open up some space.
Like back in the day when we had a C drive and next to it on the same platter, we had a D drive for our documents.
Yep.
Back in the day. I have a question. The
Thank you.
ext4 format of the hard drive is just virtual, as the VirtualBox machine is saved as a file on the Windows hard drive. Is that correct?
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be the
The-
same. Go ahead, Orv.
I was just going to say, the Linux OS natively saves it in something other than VFAT or NTFS or whatever. So yeah, the files internally are formatted within the VDI as ext4, if that's a default. And by the way, based on what I've read recently, kind of avoid BTRFS for a while, but I digress.
Yeah, it would be the same. If I am running Linux and created a Windows virtual, the file system would be NTSF. So it would be an NTSF machine that was stored inside of my Linux, which runs ext4. If that kind of answers it too.
Does anybody have any more questions? Almost to the going, gone part.
Until I show you snapshot, right?
You're right. And congratulations to everybody that I sent a chat box to I needed a first name or last name on your thumbnail or in my inbox, and everybody but 2 people paid attention. And we had somebody new enter, and I just sent a chat to that person. That's the way you get the handouts, and you get the video links so you can go over this again at your own pace. Over to whatever it was I asked you to demo.
Okay, yeah, because I see somebody who's here as a 4L Jiffy MY something out. Oh. Okay, so if we go back to sharing, and this is something that is something people should be doing. In Linux, we have snapshot programs, time shift, Macs have time shift, that you should always be periodically taking a snapshot of your computer. So if something goes wrong, then you can roll back to it. So if I click on this one right here and I do the right click, let me see if that's, oh, this one. So the 3 dots, see, I forgot my 3 dots. Right now I'm on the details. So if I click the 3 dots, snapshots or logs, I go to snapshots. And right now, this is the current state it's in. And I can take a snapshot and I'm going to name it Wednesday Workshop. And remind me that this was done before I messed it up. And I say, okay. And there I have a snapshot. So there's my current. And if I would go and make a real mess of something, I could just click on current and restore it. Oh, there we go. Wednesday Workshop. And now I can restore it. If my current state is so messed up, I just restore it. Similar to, you know, the old that never worked for me, restore points. In my Linux program, I have a snapshot program that automatically takes a snapshot every day. And then at the end of the 6 days, it'll take one for the week, and then end of another week. And then after 3 weeks, it takes a monthly one. So I have a lot of choices to go back through, but that's it right there. And that way, if I play around with it and I really screw it up, I just go back to Wednesday Workshop. Because I could do it again and say AF after workshop. And now I have an after workshop. So that's how you would do it. Oh, and look at this, Ira, or you mean Orv. I've got a clone. New machine name and path. Interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Very cool.
Looks like a MAC address it's using. So that's even beyond what I've done. So I thought that there was something about cloning. So you can go to the manual and learn what all that does. And this way. Anybody else?
Yes, how large are snapshots? See, just open up a can of worms there.
Well, let me see now if I go to my user and virtual, and let's go into, I think I was in this one. Maybe not. And it may be a hidden one. It would be as I'm thinking, or do you know for sure, does it compress?
Oh,
there,
that's a
here we
great
go.
question.
Yeah. Okay. So here it was, I had to figure out which one I was in. It was the one just plain Linux. So now I have a folder of snapshots. Oh my goodness. Yes, it is compressed. It's 2,000 kilobytes.
Oh.
And two of them together, it's 4,000 kilobytes. So yeah, it compresses it down so that you have multiple files that you can have. So yep.
Hey, John.
Yes.
If somebody was going to use that regularly, they might want to determine whether a snapshot is a full image or just a differential from the previous snapshot.
That's true. I haven't looked to see if that's a choice in VirtualBox, but yeah, for just general knowledge on snapshots, for backing up, you can get a full backup every time. And so it's going to be big, 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 or you can have a big one on Monday, and then Tuesday, it only saves the differences between Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, the only difference between, and so you can go back short times, and then the end of the week, you do a full big one again.
So
another topic.
We can call that, as we do with Restore Point, it's a snapshot of how our computer worked when it was actually working before we mucked it up by mistake.
Exactly.
Or Microsoft updates mucked it up.
Yeah.
See, Orv knows mucked it up is a technical term.
It is.
It is.
My son, who is the one that's the composer, arranger, and audio guy, said that he uses a big program called Reaper that does things with music and video and all. He said, thanks to an update in Microsoft, it didn't work right for almost 6 months
Oh my.
until they could fix up what the update messed up. So that's why, when I said why everybody wants to have a virtual machine of your actual operating system to be able to see what an update will do before you let it do it on yours. Anything else?
I was just going to comment
Yeah.
that, you know, we don't typically do that on Linux because it's fairly rare for updates to muck up the OS, but I digress.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you did about that. That's because you live in the valley one west of me, so you're closer to the ocean and it's getting in your brain.
Yeah, it's the salt there.
You got it. You wish, and I do too. Any more questions? I am just very grateful that I just use ordinary programs. So when I get my Microsoft updates, I have never, ever, ever, ever had a problem. Sorry, Orv.
Boy, she just said that. You know what's going to
Oh, I
happen
know.
next Tuesday,
Well,
October 5th.
Of course, I haven't even downloaded the spring version of the new version. It's just sitting there saying, would you like to? And I think I'll do that when I don't have a lot of stuff to do, which is never.
hey, Judy,
Yeah.
I find Windows updates pretty stable, except my ham radio applications, which are IO intensive and run a lot of USB devices. Frequently, the Windows updates will rename or rearrange the USB ports. Now,
Oh
a vanilla app doesn't care; it'll just go find it. But All of these are running from dedicated applications that get really upset when the device disappears from the port they were expecting it. It's a common malady for ham radio operators, but for the most part, they've been pretty stable.
Interesting. Okay, gone for any more questions? If not, John, take us away.
Okay. I was not quite sure if I would be able to make a good presentation, but I guess people learn stuff about it. The recording will be sent to you in a link at some point in time, along with my big slideshow. As I said, it's screenshot right after screenshot, so it's almost exactly what I did. I want to let you know that we are ending September. Tomorrow's the last day, and it looks as though we will have a full month of workshops on Wednesday next month, so I get no breaks on a Wednesday. Watch your email for registrations. And again, any of you who are in the sound of my voice, we are always looking for somebody to do a presentation and share what you know. I'm no expert. You just maybe think I am because I get up here in front and do stuff. But there are lots of topics that people have an interest in. Share with us. If there's a topic that you would like us to maybe add, let us know and we'll see if we can find somebody who can do it. And again, it doesn't have to be all by yourself. I'm glad to have Orv and Cal with me, and they'll be back third Wednesday in October for Learning Linux. And we have a number of workshops where there's 2 parts. We've got one coming up next month with 2 people, one with 1 person. Okay, so thanks so much. Oh, she thought of something else.
You got it. I am looking for, next month is a National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I hope that all of you, your groups have become champions, like my group in Santa Clarita and APCUG. If you have anybody in your group or you yourself has given a security presentation to your group, I'd love you to get in touch because it's going to kind of be all about security next month. And I'd rather have somebody give one instead of me. So security presentation, and you see what it's like, warts and all, and it works out just fine in the long run.
Yeah.
And if you've presented to your group on Zoom, this is exactly the same thing.
Good. All right. On behalf of APCUG and Judy and Bill, my co-host, and my co-presenters, Cal and Orv, want to thank you for attending this workshop. It is a benefit of your group's membership into APCUG, so make use of those benefits.